Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the fantastically talented director, Thomas Balme, who has directed his latest documentary, Sing Me a Song. And it's one of the most visually stunning documentaries I've had the opportunity to watch recently. And this was kind of a follow-up to your documentary Happiness, where you were also following Pianki in this Bhutan village. And, I know that the original plan when you filmed Happiness was actually to make the documentary Sing Me a Song about internet coming in and technology and what it does to a remote space. But the arrival of technology and internet was slightly delayed at the time. And in the interim, you've stayed in touch with him and his family throughout the years. What was it about this specific moment that you suddenly felt like it was the right moment to dive back into this story and to capture it?
Well, I don't know. I just let time pass, and I was like supposed to do another project in America, and the whole thing was canceled. And I ended up like waking up one morning and just virtually thinking, well, maybe it's time to go back and see what's going on in Bhutan. And the next, I think 3 days later, I was in Bhutan, and I just opened the. I remember very much opening the doors of the monastery and just seeing the scene, that you have in the film when the having this traveling with all these monks praying and beside in the same time using their mobile phones. So more than anything, I think this vision of this scene just convinced me that it was definitely the right time to start a new project.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask specifically about that scene because it's so fascinating to watch them praying and watch them all on their cell phones. But when you think about it in the context of like, kids in America and all around the world sitting on their cell phones while having conversations at dinner with their parents, it's actually not that unusual. So were you consciously thinking the whole time about how you wanted to create this parallel to the rest of the world, but it's really just the setting that people are not used to seeing the technology in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just this is what I've been doing endlessly with all of my films for the last 15 years. It's just trying to change paradigm and instead of looking at the rest of the world, looking at ourselves through different societies who have different paradigms than ours. But you're absolutely right. There is nothing different than my own kids when I'm stepping in their room. Who are like teenagers and were pretending to study, and I just look behind their books, and instead of studying, they're just playing with their mobile phones, which is something which is happening, I think, in any American home every day, and not only in America but in China, everywhere. And this is the subject for this film, but this has been what I've been trying to do for the last 10 films I've done. Um, so again, this is not a film about Bhutan. This is not a film about Buddhism. This is really a film about our relationship with technology.
hmm And I absolutely adored the way that you filmed that specific shot where you have the camera kind of in a close up and then you gradually just pan out. So it tells us more and more in every single frame. How did you land on the specific decision of how you wanted to film that, given that you saw that as like a thing that was happening very frequently the very first time that you went back there?
Well, it's exactly that. It's just if I had done like kind of one static shot, which is
hmm
something I do a lot, I think we would have missed this kind of surprise and the fact of realizing that they're not only praying, which is what you can think for the last first 10 seconds. But I didn't think that much. I just said, well, I just should do a movement. I didn't bring that much equipment from France. I just saw in the village a wheelchair, and I just did a kind of very low tech traveling by sitting on the wheelchair and having one of my assistants pulling me back. And I didn't know if it would work. And then we just looked at it and we thought, oh, yeah, this is great, and I I like this kind of improvising things and not bringing kind of crazy equipment from abroad, but just using what you have on the field and trying to do things which are meaningful. Uh, and the more it goes, the more I'm trying to create shots which potentially are almost short films of their own. They could, you can forget about the rest of the film. You can just look at that, and it's always telling a lot of what I'm trying to say. But you can say that to maybe 20 shots in the film. I'm trying to have less and less dialogue, and not too much discussions and interviews or whatever, but just shots that the people are going to remember, which are a kind of small themes of their own, and to really play with the uniqueness of documentary by not doing fiction, not doing radio, not doing journalism, but just doing reality, and try to capture it in a way which speaks to the people in something which is real, and but which is cinematic too. And there is some kind of huge power that TV took, considering documentary as something which just should be journalistic, when it's only one part of what it can be. And to me, documentaries can be as cinematic as any fiction. And I'm very interested in trying to visually work on that aspect as much as on all the rest of the other aspect that usually documentary filmmakers do spend some energy on.
And to that point about the cinematic nature of the film, you also have such a stunningly beautiful use of light within it as well. When we're looking at Pyongyang in a VR arcade, the way that you capture kind of like the neon lights of that space, like looks like you would have set up the lighting yourself in the way that you film it. And there's so many moments like that throughout the film where you really use light and color to tell a story. What's the uniqueness as a documentarian in telling a film and really thinking about the specificity of color and light in that way when you don't have the opportunity to manufacture it, and you're really kind of coming into these spaces and just seeing how you want to film them in different ways?
Well, this is really something very organic. I'm not thinking that much. It's just I could have spent 10 hours and do a film of 10 hours just observing on a very close up the eyes and the expressions of any of my characters. One of them, which was amazing, was a friend of Pyongyang who is coming to town later to pick him up and bring him back to the monastery. His expression while watching the screens and all the different light that you could observe in his eyes and on his skin and all that was, to me, mesmerizing. And I could just like do a close up of that, and it could have been the whole film, and there would have been nothing else. This would have been more experimental project, but I would have loved to do that also. So when you start a film in a community where the only source of light are candles, and you come back a few months later, and the only source of light are this screen, because they use it as a torch to allow them to move in the night from one place to another. I mean, this is, and I'm not thinking too much about it, but of course there is something very interesting to use in a cinematic way in between these two spaces, the monasteries, the towns, this neon lights, the clubs, and we are working on that on the editing room. But when I shoot it, it's just something that again is very organic to me. Is like a fascination of this light, and we never used any extra light. And the whole thing was done with the natural light of the phones, which are like amazing, and what kind of light they can create on the faces of these boys, yeah, again, it's something which allows you to tell the story visually, which is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be as visual and as little intellectual as I can be. And I think it's a huge problem that most fiction and documentaries do have these days, is to spend too much time on words and dialogues and meanings and all that, and give up so much the visual aspect, when my my move is much more to have less and less dialogue, not to be as radical as I was with Babies, which didn't have any dialogues at all, and was purely visual. But it's true that after Babies, I this was something very interesting for me to realize the fascination when you can work purely visually and tell a story almost without any dialogue. And something which I've been deeply influenced by after committing this film.
Yeah, I also love the stylistic intimacy that you always manage to create with your subjects in your films, and obviously particularly with this one. Do you find that kind of the choices you make in terms of the way that you're filming it, and the fact that it really is just observational, you're not doing talking heads, you're not asking anyone to turn around and speak to camera, that really allows them to just become more comfortable with you just kind of like being at the sidelines observing with the camera?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's kind of real relationship you develop. Again, when you're spending that much time with someone, uh, you know, 10 years with the same character, that you are coming 30 times to a country, you just like uh, part of the world and the monastery, and I'm not trying to be small. We work with huge cameras, with huge lenses. We have been working with Cook uh, panoramic lenses, which are usually used for Western or this kind of films, like big like that. So this was the opposite of being small and being but it doesn't change at all the fact of them behaving the way they should behave. To me, it's kind of things that maybe when you start and you are young in filmmaking, you think you need to be by yourself and you need to have to be fly on the wall style and all that. But the more it goes, the more I'm working on tripod, the more I'm working with huge equipment, with cinematic equipment, and I realize that this is totally crazy to think that you can be you are never forgotten by your characters, but it's just what kind of relationship you have and what kind of trust you have to allow them to interact and live the way they need to live their stories.
Yeah. And in terms of, trust with the people that you were filming, obviously you had the added experience of having worked with Pyanki and his family before. What was it like in terms of approaching the monastery and approaching some of the other subjects, and kind of like gaining their trust and having conversations to make sure that they felt really comfortable with you coming in and filming and following them as well?
Well, the more it goes, again, the more I'm trying to film less, and
Mhm.
not to. When I was younger, filmmaker, I feel like dozens of hours, and now I'm really trying to film as little as I can, but to really anticipate uh, the key moments which are going to be important for my story. So I can, for example, when I know that he's having this relationship with this girl, I'm not going to spend 6 months to wait for him to go and decide. I'm just going to be back in France and having someone on the field. And when he's going to be ready to finally go to the village, I'm going to get a phone call. I'm going to take a plane the next day, and I'm going to be there, just to be there on this moment where he's going to meet her. That's it. Uh, and so it's construction, and this is directing, but this is directing by just anticipating and trying to think, well, the story needs to move on. And so there is not that much observation like I could have done on other project of mine. For that project, I was being much more focused on a story and trying to have this story happening, and never provocating it, but just letting time and months pass by, and just be there at the right time, at the right moment, by having a full-time kind of connection with the characters to tell them, okay, what are you going to do? How is and and be there with a huge camera, which usually is only used in fiction, with a sound recorder and big lenses and all that, and capture that in the right way.
Yeah. That's a really remarkable sense of anticipation in terms of kind of seeing that he was messaging this girl and starting to anticipate by going to also film her. And at the
Mm.
time that you started filming her as well, you obviously didn't know if they would ever actually meet in the film. But was it something where you just thought that there was a really interesting parallel in following both of their journeys and showing the juxtaposition of their two lives? You know, there's a slightly different socioeconomic background for her. She's obviously living in a city that's more populated, so her day-to-day life feels a little bit different. What was kind of the original intent with following her when you didn't know if you would ever get any scenes with the two of them together?
Uh, well, I felt that the contrast of the town
Mhm,
and the girl dancing and the and the Amazon
mhm,
consumerism that they were
mhm,
all the money. I felt the contrast. It's just a question of contrast. I felt the contrast was great, even if they had never met. Uh,
mhm,
I felt there was something missing of just staying in the monastery, which was what I did in happiness. Um, so I didn't know where it would bring me. In the same way, I had no clue she would leave. You know, she didn't even tell me
mhm,
when she left for Kuwait. You know, I just even if I was trying to anticipate as much as I could, she just took a decision in one day, and she had the opportunity of leaving the country, and we just went to see her, and then she was gone. Uh, uh, so things happen like that, you know. At one stage, I even thought of potentially going and shoot in Kuwait and keeping on the film of her being in Kuwait and him
mhm,
being in the monastery. This could have maybe done a new
mhm,
chapter, um, but then I didn't. You know, it's very organic how things
mhm,
work. You know, I don't think so much while I'm shooting.
mhm.
It's purely I I just do it because I feel I have to do it, and then we are trying to make sense a little bit later on with all that. But I knew for sure that there was some kind of interesting contrast in between that club
Mhm,
where these girls were dancing and the monastery. And as you say, even visually, I love the contrast of the red, of the lights, of all that. I would say that the visual aspect of all that motivates me and pushes me to decide on what to do and not what to do. It's
mhm,
really very photographic first, and then later on, okay, potentially it's going to create something, but I'm not sure. But it's really the visual which convinced me of following one path or another.
mhm. And you know, the framing when he first comes and meets her and sees, you know, okay, she has a kid, she didn't tell him, and when they're having that first conversation together, I thought the framing was really powerful in that you really choose to just stay on him. So we've got like a singular
Mm,
frame with him, with her kid just kind of like running back and forth in the background, and then there's a moment where he's just kind of internalizing and trying to process everything and take it all in, and you just kind of hone right in on his face, and you just really allow the camera to sit there in those moments and just kind of like focus on his emotion. But was that something throughout the entire film where a lot of camera choices were informed by the fact that it really is, at the end of the day, it's always coming back to his perspective and the way that he is seeing things in that way?
well, it's partly that.
Mhm,
Another thing is like technically, uh, I started this whole new project with a very light camera, and I was running everywhere, and I didn't like at all what I liked, and so I
mhm,
just decided to go for a lot of constraints
mhm,
and like prime lenses. So it's I never used any zoom in the film. If there is a
mhm,
movement, the camera is moving, but there is never any. And so
mhm,
when you're shooting such a scene, which you know you cannot repeat, and it's once, uh, and you don't want to have just a wide angle. So I had
mhm,
like I was you just do choice, you know, and you are losing things potentially. But again, it's film after film. You're realizing that being radical in the choices you make always pay back.
mhm,
I feel maybe I'm wrong, but this is my you know you have to be radical
mhm,
and I felt that at that moment I could have decided 2 minutes before that finally I would put my camera on her and not on him. But I knew I wouldn't have the two for the whole scene. I knew that potentially I would focus on one of them, and I did not know he would cry. I did not know he would react like that. This was so it's a kind of again, it's very organic, but you are being trying to take decisions which are not like taking everything. You're just losing a lot, but what you have it in a way which works cinematically because reality is happening and there is something happening that you have in a certain way. You are very close with kind of, and it works. But I had no clue of anything on the way of what I would get, and this is how interesting it is. A different kind of work than a fiction filmmaker who is working months and years to write his script and try to reproduce his script and all that. The energy and the way documentary are being made are just like, it's totally different kind of work. It's like I think I would be a very bad feature filmmaker. I hate to have like dozens of people on the set and waiting for me to tell them what to do and all that, and even we end up doing kind of similar films at the end. The process and the way things are being made cannot be more different than fiction filmmaker, and I think and documentary filmmaker. And I think many documentary filmmaker who decide to go to fiction very unusually end up being good fiction filmmaker, because even if it's still the same material like a film, I think the process is totally opposite.
Yeah. And then, in terms of the narrative structure of the film, following when he goes down there, then we see, his friend from the monastery who you were mentioning earlier, who is sent to try and convince him to come back. And I loved the journey with the two of them, where it's like they go to the VR arcade, they go to like a video game arcade. He introduces his friend to like eating chow mein and using chopsticks for the very first time. And those kind of like beats in themselves feel so fascinating and so powerful and tell us so much, even about his friend's life experience up to that point as well. So it's really kind of capturing the two of them really intimately. Were those kind of just like the natural beats and rhythms of the things they did together, or were there kind of other moments of them interacting and other places that they went that you would have loved to have been able to include but just didn't necessarily fit into the film?
No, I think no, there is nothing I didn't. I could put everything I wanted to in the film. There is nothing I couldn't do. No, I think it's just the way it happened.
And in terms of post-production on the film, kind of like what was the biggest challenge with this? Because, especially with documentary filmmaking, there's such an extensive amount of footage. I know that when you were filming Happiness that you were there for 3 years, and I'm not sure how long that you were following for this one. And you said that you had a little bit less time that
A
you
bit
would be
less,
in and
like,
out.
yeah, maybe 2 years instead of
Yeah.
3. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well,
even then, with 2 years of footage, like what was that like in terms of just like taking the footage and how you work with figuring out, what actually fits into the film, what really fits with the narrative structure especially when you've got that volume?
Well, at the end of every single shoot, we spend sometimes editing, like 2-3 weeks editing at the end of every single shot. This is and I'm doing things in a very special way too. I'm working with 2 editors, and we can potentially work on the same scenes, and I can jump from one room to another with 2 different perspectives and 2 different kind of way of organizing these scenes. And then we confront and share and either pick one thing or just mix the two. And I was very lucky even on that project at the end to go on the field with one of the editor and really edit for the last shots, for the last time of the shooting, to really work almost live and edit on the field every night, which is something I'd never done. And I felt was important for me to be sure that once you're back in France, you need to be sure that it's very complicated together. So I knew it would be my last shot. I wanted to really make sure I didn't miss anything. And so yeah, the editor came on the field, and we ended up the whole editing in Bhutan itself.
Yeah, it's such a stunning film, and I really loved the experience of watching it and the way that you capture this story. So congratulations on everything with the movie, and thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to you.